Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer. Today we'll discuss the 2024 election. But first, we're joined by Angela Columbus, investigative reporter with Spotlight PA. You wrote recently that the Department of State maintains a list of campaign contributions made by no-bid contractors. How does the state determine the circumstances that provide for no-bid contracts to be granted?
Well, no-bid contracts can be granted under certain very specific circumstances, right? If there's an emergency, for instance, and there is no time to get multiple bids and assess those for the best deal, you can award a no-bid contract. And the state, in its election code, has a section that basically says if you are a no-bid contractor, it's basically your responsibility at that point to report to the Department of State annually, whether your directors or your employees or any of your spouses have made political contributions and to whom.
Now, according to the Election Code, the Department of State has deadlines for when contribution reports are required, and those need to be published as well. How difficult are these records to access?
I mean, they're not difficult if you know about it, which I've been in the Capitol for nearly 2 decades, and I had no idea that these reports existed, despite the fact that I spent a lot of time on the website for campaign contributions. So once you know about it, you can go to the Department of State and ask for a copy of the actual list of these no-bid contributions. Now, that list is not necessarily user-friendly. It's basically like a long recitation of businesses, who they've given to, and the dates of those donations. But you actually have to know about it to go and request it. And I had asked the Department of State why they don't make this publicly available on their website as they do with campaign contributions. And we didn't get a response, but I've been writing about the Department of State's Campaign Finance Bureau for a very long time, and I know better than a lot of people that it is definitely understaffed and probably very underfunded.
What can you learn by correlating the amount of campaign contributions with those who receive these no-bid contracts?
Well, the purpose of it is to avoid what's called pay-to-play, which is, in theory, to give money through campaign donations in order to secure a coveted government contract. That's why it was put into place. And these lists provide kind of a neat and tidy way to connect some dots. If you know that, for instance, in your town, your local government has given a no-bid contract to somebody, to a company, you can then quickly look up that company to see, okay, did they give to my local elected official? Did they give to my mayor? Even if they did, I mean, this is America. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is one way of ensuring transparency and disclosure in the process.
Spotlight PA was able to access the 2023 records. Were there any instances you found where a beneficiary of these contracts made significant contributions to a specific campaign or candidate?
I mean, yes, there were significant contributions throughout. The problem with these lists is that they're not super comprehensive. For instance, if it will list the donations, all donations over $1,000 by somebody in the company, but it won't tell you who that company, what agency, whether state or local, where they have that contract. So it presupposes some knowledge on the readers or the public's part when they look at these lists.
Is there any additional specific information or details that you'd like to see the Department of State require just to provide greater transparency?
Well, first off, I'd love to see these things go online, and I'd love to see them go online in a searchable form. That's really critical, I think, when you're looking through these, because right now they're basically PDFs of lists and forms that have been submitted by the individual contractors. But I would also love to see them require the companies to list who they have the no-bid contracts with, so that the public then doesn't have to take the extra step and go to the state's website for contracts and look that information up.
What would need to happen to encourage state entities to provide greater transparency by requiring online publishing of political contributions?
I mean, I think it requires action by the legislature, and the legislature really has not taken significant steps to toughen up the campaign contribution law and campaign finance law, or lobbying law for that matter, in years. And it really is going to take their will and their goodwill, because this is an issue that the public does care about and wants to see reforms in. And unless they take action, or somebody at least starts, really talking about it a lot, and openly and consistently, I don't know that we're going to see much change.
Angela Columbus, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after this short break. Welcome back. Our guests today are TJ Rooney, Senior Partner at Rooney, Novak, Isenhour Group, and Lowman Henry, Chair of the Lincoln Institute of Public Opinion Research. Now, with just over 2 weeks to go before Election Day, there are numerous polls, campaign appearances, etc. Lowman, we'll start with you. What do you look at to get a sense of how Pennsylvania voters will lean in this election?
Well, it's very difficult to try to discern how Pennsylvanians are going to lean here. What I'm looking at is not so much the polls, because all of the polls, if you look at them, polling usually has a margin of error of plus or minus 4%. And almost every poll that we've seen in the last couple of weeks, it's either tied, Harris up 1, Trump up 1. It's all within the margin of error. I've been more looking at the voter registration statistics and the mail-in ballot statistics. Republicans, today's the last day to register to vote. Republicans have cut the Democrats' statewide voter registration edge by more than half since 4 years ago, down to now almost just 300,000 registered voters. And in terms of mail-in ballots, Democrats are way off from their mail-in ballot requests from 4 years ago. Republicans are off too, but the net gain for Republicans is significant. So rather than look at polling, I'm looking at the actual hard numbers of registration and mail-in ballot requests.
TJ, same question to you. What do you look at to get a sense of how you think this election might go?
No, Lowman, absolutely. You laid out some very sound metrics, but the intangible is really what, it's hard to quantify, but it's probably the most important thing, and that's intensity. And I do think, as we all know, I mean, we live in America. We saw a definitive change in intensity among Democrats when Kamala Harris became our nominee. So I look at, where I start every conversation, at least in my weird head, is at 80,000. And I say, what has changed in 4 years to cause a change of 80,000 votes in the state? And things like Lowman suggests are relevant factors, but the intangible is the one that's the hardest to quantify, and that is intensity and support. And I still get the absolute sense that among Democratic voters, there is a great desire to see. I don't know if it's a great desire. It's as much a desire to see Kamala Harris win as it is to see Donald Trump lose. And regardless of your motivation, that's what's going to create the intensity that I think will carry the day.
Now, since you both briefly referenced voter data, the Department of State notes that almost 76,000 people have left the two major political parties this year, and they registered as independents or third-party voters. Why do you suspect that's happening?
I think the reasons are pretty obvious. Our parties seem to have, to a lot of people, gotten away from where most Americans are. I have always used the notion that 80% of us, Lowman and I, my friend Alan Novak, who, by the way, is recovering from some planned surgery. So I just want to send a shout out, my very best, to my dear friend and business partner, Alan Novak. Guys like Lowman and Alan and so many others, what differentiates us is our opinions and meaningful opinions, but not the kind of cavernous, differences that you would see if you turned on just the news every day. The news puts on people who are on the extremes, and, we aren't. Most people aren't on the extremes. So I think that people identify more with, for example, the independent. People would rather be identified as an independent voter. That's why we should let them vote in primaries, by the way. So it stands to reason that as parties seem to, at least in the eyes of voters, get away from the center and get away more and more from reality, there's a gravitational pull toward the center. And I think we ought to recognize that. And I think as Democrats, we ought to take advantage of that.
I think TJ is right. And what we've seen here, particularly in this race, and I did reference it when we had a conversation off camera here before we started, all the television advertising is negative. It's all one candidate bashing the other candidate over whatever issue happens to be. If you go back to, for example, as a conservative Republican, I always go back to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, yeah, politics has always been a bare-knuckled sport, but Ronald Reagan was always aspirational. You know, he talked about the hopes and the dreams of the American people and the policies that would make those hopes and dreams come true. And I'm afraid we've gotten away from that in politics, which I think is one of the reasons, one of the reasons TJ is correct here. A lot of folks are registering independent because they just don't like that negativity on either side. So what I would hope to see in the closing days of this presidential race, particularly from President Trump, is that he would return to that message of optimism, that message that, yes, we can make that American dream come true, because I do believe Republican policies, conservative policies can make that happen.
Now, something we were just discussing before we went live on the air is that the Trump campaign just announced that they're going to conduct a 5-day barnstorming tour across Pennsylvania, 2 or 3 stops every day. Is there a point where that doesn't become productive anymore? Can you oversaturate a state or a voter electorate?
Well, I've been wondering how many of these mega rallies you can have with, 6, 8, 10,000 people. As we head into the last couple of weeks, I think it's more important for Republicans who are activists to be out knocking on doors, to be making phone calls, to be engaged in voter contact rather than being at rallies. Of course, you do have to show up at rallies for the candidate. I do think we can reach a saturation point, and both sides are really treating Pennsylvania as if it were a statewide race rather than a national race here. And we're going to see a lot more of the candidates. But what's important, Francine, as they do these bus tours and as they talk to the media and to people, I think it's the message that they deliver. And Republicans need to stay focused on message that our economic policies in particular can bring us back from the mega inflation, from the economic problems that we've had over the last 3.5 years.
TJ, would you like to chime in on this as well?
Well, I mean, only to agree and suggest that Lowman is exactly right. The problem is there's no demonstrated evidence over the course of almost 9 years that Donald Trump has the capacity or the ability or the discipline to stay on message. Stephen Miller, the president's very, very close advisor and one of the principal movers and shakers behind Project 2025, suggested in advance of the president's trip to Latrobe this weekend that he was going to use that opportunity in Latrobe to talk about the closing argument, if you will, to give Americans and Pennsylvanians reasons why he would be the preferred candidate, should be their preferred candidate. And as we know, he spent 12 minutes talking about Arnold Palmer's underpants. So like that's the problem. I agree that if this were a disciplined candidate who was able to stay on message, we'd have an even greater challenge than we do. But make no mistake, there's not ever been a shred of evidence that the Republican candidate can stay on message. And if you don't think that hurts everybody else, I'm speaking to you today from North Carolina. And in North Carolina, they have not only Donald Trump to contend with, but a Republican running for governor who makes Donald Trump look like Winston Churchill. And, you can say whatever, but it makes a huge, big difference, not only in terms of those elections, but the down ballot elections. So Lowman's right. When you consider the fact that our state house is divided by one vote or decided by a 1-vote majority, and the state Senate has an opportunity to get closer, those men and women are praying a novena every day to ask Donald Trump just either to go somewhere else or most certainly to say something else.
So if you look at what issues are top priorities to drive voters to the polls, does that differ for Democrats versus Republicans?
No, Francine, because the economy matters tremendously to everybody. But I think that the difference maker in previous elections since Donald Trump was president and on November 5th will be women voters and the issue of choice. That issue, while it's not perhaps as front and center as it was 2 years ago, is still as politically potent, if not more so, than ever. So I would say that, yeah, I mean, Lowman would have other issues that are important to Republican voters, I'm sure. But for Democratic voters and a lot of Republican women and independent voters, the issue of choice remains as resonant today as it was 2 years ago.
Well, I'm not quite sure about that. I know the Democrats have made so-called choice, a woman's ability to choose whether or not to have an abortion, as a key issue. And as I've watched the advertising, it's almost exclusively on that. Now, it's exclusively on choice because Democrats can't talk about the economy, because the record that they have on the economy with over 20% plus inflation over the last 3.5 years is not something they can talk about. They can't defend it. Immigration, I think, is a far bigger issue and concern for Americans than is choice. And in Pennsylvania in particular, I think the choice issue is going to fall flat in this election, because despite the fact that Democrats have tried to spin the Dobbs decision as having taken away a woman's right to choose, it did no such thing. All the Dobbs decision did was say that abortion is an issue to be determined by the states, which had always been the pro-life position for many, many years, that it was a state issue, not a national issue. So the Dobbs decision kicked it back to the states, and that brings us down to Pennsylvania. And in Pennsylvania, we have the Abortion Control Act, which was put into place back in the administration of former Governor Robert P. Casey. That has been the law of the land now for 40 years in Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, because of the Dobbs decision, literally nothing has changed in Pennsylvania. So at the granular level, people are not feeling the change because it hasn't occurred. Will it change in Pennsylvania? This is Pennsylvania. Things rarely change in Pennsylvania. I think particularly on an issue that is as much of a flashpoint as abortion. I don't see the Abortion Control Act, which does make abortion legal up through the first 6 months of a pregnancy. I don't see that changing in Pennsylvania. I don't think either side has the ability to bring about a change. So despite the fact that Democrats are hanging their hat on that issue, I think it's a motivating issue for their base, and it might help them turn out their base, and it's good for them from that point of view. But when it comes down to the bottom line, folks are going to sit at the kitchen table and they're going to decide, are we better off now than we were under President Trump? And the answer to that question is very clear.
Now, TJ mentioned Project 2025 a moment ago. What should our viewers know about that?
Well, several things. Again, this is the Democrats attempting to create a bogeyman out there. Number one, Project 2025 is not a product of the Trump campaign. President Trump has said that repeatedly. And of course, when it comes to campaigns, it doesn't matter what you say. They run ads saying, for example, they've trotted Social Security, which every 2 years Democrats pull out of their issue booklet. President Trump has made it very clear. Project 2025 is not a product of the Trump campaign. What it is, it's something that conservatives in this country have been doing since the administration of Ronald Reagan. In Ronald Reagan, there was a product put together by conservatives, predominantly by the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., to take all the various policy proposals that conservative groups of all stripes had and put them in one place. That's what Project 2025 is. It's simply a compilation of conservative policy proposals that a wide range of conservative organizations have been advocating for the last 40, 50 years. So it's now called Project 2025. The Democrats are trying to make it look like it's some sort of a subversive plan for the Trump administration to take over the country. No, it's common sense conservative solutions to problems all put in one place.
TJ, do you think Project 2025 will play a role in this election?
I think the world of Lowman Henry. If we had more Lowman Henrys and Jeff Coleman's and Charlie Dents in the world, we could do great things. But either Project 2025 didn't exist, but now it exists in a different form. Francine, here's the problem with Project 2025 and a potential rerun of Donald Trump. All the good people have been hollowed out. There are no more Rex Tillersons. There are no more General Kellys. There are no more Mike Pompeos. There's no more guardrails. He's hollowed out. He's taken brilliant men and hollowed them into husks of themselves. People that were once titans of industry are now virtually unrecognizable because they had the opportunity to interact on behalf of the administration of Donald Trump. So Lowman, like, I respect you very much, but Donald Trump says Project 2025 doesn't exist. You say it exists, but in a more pure form, a more thoughtful form than it's been given credit. And I will defer to you. I believe you any day more than I believe him. But what scares people, Francine, why this is a big issue, and not just a bogeyman, but a real concern, is because the things that would be embodied in are different, very, very different. Let's not call them. Let me not throw adjectives around. Let's just say it would be a different way, a very different way of governing. And that the people that are now around Donald Trump, who would have important positions in the next administration, don't care for the guardrails the way the Don McCann's general counsel did, and in the way Bill Barr, even, I can't imagine I'm saying this, but even to the degree that Bill Barr, our attorney general, did, they put limits on the president. They told him what he could do and what he couldn't do. And the fear that I have, and I think a lot of Pennsylvanians and Americans have, is that there will be no more guardrails. The people around will be exclusively yes men and women who will let this president do what he wants to do. And the things that he's expressed he wants to do scare the living tar out of us, a lot of us. And I think that's why Project 2025 and the people Donald Trump surrounds himself with are very, very important.
Actually, Project 2025 is exactly the opposite. The problem we have in this country is that way too much power and authority has been ceded by Congress to the administrative branch of the executive branch of government, what we like to call the deep state, the bureaucracy. Project 2025 takes direct aim at the bureaucracy, and it would return power to Congress, where our elected representatives would be required when they pass legislation to not just say, oh, we're going to pass broad-based legislation, we'll let the bureaucrats make the rules. No. Project 25 is, Congress, now you must do your job. We want our elected officials to make the rules, not unelected bureaucrats. So to that end, Project 2025 is an arrow right to the heart of the deep state, which is why it's become such a flashpoint in this election, because the Democrats are all about the deep state and about executive control. So in terms of guardrails, Project 2025, which again is not a component of the Trump campaign, it's a product of the conservative movement, is all about returning that power to Congress.
But see, that's why I like Lowman Henry. Lowman Henry tells you the truth. And that's to be lauded in this day and age, and it's a most admirable trait and quality in a fellow. And I thank him for that, because, depending on who you talk to, they say never heard of it. It doesn't exist. That you must be making things up in a fever dream. So, Lowman, thank you. At least you have the chutzpah and to acknowledge that it exists, and it's in a more pure form, as you've said, than it's been described. But at least you have the guts to own up to it and say it is out there and it is something to be considered one way or the other. So thank you for that.
Well, and I appreciate that, TJ. And it is a gamble to some degree, because we don't know whether the House of Representatives will be under Republican control or Democrat control, or the U.S. Senate. So in terms of giving Congress more power and having Congress have more impact on regulations, it's a roll of the dice as to which party would control it. But that's what the country's all about. We elect people. Elections have consequences.
Now, let's talk a little bit about who's supporting some of these campaigns. There's a number of prominent Republican figures, some that are former electeds, such as former Vice President Cheney, who are they've voiced their support for Kamala Harris. There's a group, Republican voters against Trump, spending $11 million on advertising in swing states. Does this tactic of reaching out to get voters to cross party lines, does that work?
Actually, I think it's going to backfire. If you look at the Trump base, and I really think this election, as razor thin as it is in Pennsylvania and all the battleground states, it's going to be a turnout election. It's going to be which party can get their voters to the polls. Democrats have been doing a better job of that than we have in the last few years, particularly with mail-in ballots, although that's changing with the Pennsylvania Chase and other efforts. Republicans are now working on mail-in ballots. But this particular problem that you have with people like Dick Cheney and other Republicans what happens with the Trump base, they look at these people and they say, this is the swamp. These are the people who got us into trouble for decades and who we rejected, and that's why we elected Donald Trump in 2016. So the more you have a focus on these so-called Republicans, and I'm not going to use the term rhino because I deeply respect the job that Dick Cheney did as our vice president. I deeply respect the job that Mike Pence did as vice president. But, they're all part of what Trump base voters see as the problem. So the more they speak out, the more Trump voters are compelled to go to the polls.
TJ, your thoughts on this?
It would be hard to dispute what Lowman said, and that is that Trump voters absolutely have made up their mind, and they don't care for Liz Cheney. But there are voters who do, and they live in places like Chester County, and they, like Liz Cheney, probably don't agree much with Kamala Harris on policy, but they listen very intently to what she has to say about the threat that Donald Trump poses to our Constitution and to our democracy. And that's why Liz Cheney is compelling. I don't think she's going to go speak anywhere, whether it be in Oakland County later today or in Waukesha County in Wisconsin or in Chester County in Pennsylvania. I don't think she's going to go to any of those places and make an argument that her economic policy is better or her immigration policy is better. She's going to make an argument that she's a better human person and she's better equipped to handle the challenges that come with the presidency, and that Donald Trump, when given the opportunity, made a mockery or tried to make a mockery of so much of what we stand for as Americans, including his unusually strange relationship with foreign dictators, including our avowed enemy, Vladimir Putin. So Liz Cheney's going to go make those points, the very same points, by the way, that her father, Dick Cheney, the former vice president, would have made. So I do think, and I agree with Lowman, he's right. For a locked-in Trump voter, Liz Cheney, or truthfully, Martian Liz Cheney, is not going to make a difference. But for a lot of other voters, what she has to say, who she is, what she's all about, where she comes from, does make a difference and will be important. And I'm glad she's coming here today. And I'm glad she's going to the other places that she intends to go this afternoon, because they're all the places that are going to make a difference in this upcoming election.
On the topic of who's supporting the candidates, on the other side of the coin, businessman Elon Musk has been holding voter town halls in Pennsylvania over the last several days. He's made news for offering randomly to pay $1 million to registered voters that will sign his 2 petitions. What do you make of his interest in the presidential race?
It scares me to my core, in that, listen, Elon Musk is a genius. He is a modern day genius. I mean, just the car thing alone would have been a thing, but he's got rocket ships, he's got satellites, he's got Wi-Fi. I mean, the man is a genius. And what I think he's doing is genius. He is playing this man, the former president, like a violin. And we all know, because Putin knows, she knows, and I'm not putting Elon Musk into that category by any stretch of the imagination. But Elon Musk knows that he can play this man. And if he does prevail, Elon Musk will be given the keys. Donald Trump will turn. He's already said he's going to make him like our productivity. Elon Musk will have a lot to say about our government. And that scares me. Not because it's Elon Musk, but that if it was Jeff Bezos or if it was Bill Gates or if it was anybody else, I'd have the same concerns about exacting influence over the commander in chief. So I don't have a beef. I mean, I admire, my God, I'm a Democrat, but I believe in capitalism. I think Elon Musk is, in those spaces, the bee's knees, but in politics, I think he's poison, in that he's doing it, I think, for reasons that belie the truth.
I actually don't think anybody's going to play Donald Trump, but in terms of Democrats who are supporting Republicans now, I think the most notable is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. had been, as we all know, running as an independent. He has endorsed Donald Trump, and he actually, in that endorsement speech, Francine, went out and said, today's Democrat Party is not the Democrat Party that my father, Robert F. Kennedy Sr., or my uncle, John F. Kennedy, could support. And I think if you're looking in terms of votes, as TJ said earlier, what has changed that is going to cause an 80,000 vote swing from 4 years ago from Biden to Trump? The support of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and those Democrats who now feel the Democrat Party has left them is going to make a big difference. And more importantly, the presence of Jill Stein on the ballot. That's something 4 years ago, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania politically removed Jill Stein from the ballot. If you look at where the Green Party candidates got votes in the other statewide races, in the race for Auditor General, the Green Party candidate got 81,000 votes. In the race for State Treasurer, the Green Party candidate got, I think, 78,000 votes. You have to believe that 99.9% of Jill Stein voters went to Joe Biden. They didn't go to Donald Trump. Just the presence of Jill Stein alone on the ballot, I think, evens out the playing field. And then you add in people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, who have come over to the Republican side. I think it's more than even now, which is why all the polls are showing it to be at least dead even or pretty close.
We're going to continue our discussion in just a moment. First, I'd like to give our guests a brief break while we look at what's coming up on PCN. Tomorrow on the PCN Capitol Preview, it's that time of year when Pennsylvania sportsmen start making plans for hunting season. Stephen Smith, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Game Commission, will bring us up to date tomorrow live at 9 a.m. The big election is only a couple of weeks away, and we have a debate for you tomorrow from the Congressional District 8. Democrat Matt Cartwright faces off with Republican Robert Bresnahan, courtesy of WVIA TV. That's tomorrow night, live at 7 o'clock. On Wednesday, we have more one-on-one exclusive interviews with candidates for you. First at 8 p.m., we'll introduce you to Malcolm Kenyatta, a Democrat running for State Auditor General. And then right after that, at 8:30 p.m., we'll have Bob Goodrich, a candidate from the Constitution Party, telling us about his campaign for State Auditor General. On Journalist Roundtable this week, our guests will be Boris Kracheniuk from WVIA, Lindsay Weber from The Morning Call, and Carter Walker from VoteBeat. That's Thursday at 7 o'clock. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free of charge on the internet. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers and donors like you to help achieve its mission. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Let's get back to our discussion. Will Bunch wrote in the Philadelphia Inquirer last week about Donald Trump's characterization of his rival Kamala Harris as mentally impaired, and that, quote, the frequency of this claim and that millions backing Democrat Harris might not just have different ideas about issues like climate change or tariffs, but must suffer from a mental illness is disturbing, end quote. In a time where there's increased sensitivity to mental health, suicide rates growing, how does this, do you see this working against President Trump?
Not really. I think at this point, voters are accustomed to President Trump and his rhetorical style. We have to keep in mind, President Trump is a New Yorker. And I think what shocked the electorate is having been used to the genteel New England patriot, New England type of approach to things as the Bushes had, and Ronald Reagan's very genial approach. Having a brash New Yorker sort of shocked the political system, but that was 8 years ago. I think we're over that. Donald Trump, using that language, just tongue in cheek, a lot of people on the conservative side do think that leftism is a mental disorder. But setting that aside, if you look at the issues that the left is predominantly concerned with, you mentioned climate change, you mentioned the abortion issue, et cetera. These are issues that poll after poll is showing rate very far down the list of things that concern Americans. And the real concerns and the two issues that are going to drive this election are the economy and immigration. On both of those fronts, Donald Trump and Republicans have the upper hand. All the polls are showing that by a wide margin, Americans trust Donald Trump to bring about an economic resurgence more so than the Democrats. Americans trust Donald Trump more on the immigration issue than the Democrats. Kamala Harris was the border czar, so clearly she can't talk about that issue. So you have all these sort of side things that come in from rhetorical flourishes, but at the end of the day, people are going to sit at the kitchen table and they're going to look at what it costs them to just put food on that table, pay for their house if they can afford to have one, put gas in the car if they can afford to do so. And they're going to look at the inflation of the past 3.5 years, and they're going to make their decision on their own economic well-being.
TJ, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I believe the quote that you showed had to do with the president passing judgment on the mental fitness of Harris supporters. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine? I mean, I'm almost at a loss for words for a man who recently called his own supporters fat slobs, who crapped all over Detroit while giving a speech in Detroit. And then over the weekend, spent 12 minutes at a Get Out the Vote rally talking about Arnold Palmer's underpants. So I'm confused as to its projection. Like, you ever when I was a kid, I used to hate these little rascals that would, they would say something and then they'd run it and grab the teacher. They go, nanny, nanny, boo boo. And then they'd run around and they'd grab the teacher. They'd say, whenever you say you're rubber and I'm glue and it sticks to me and it screws you or whatever it is. That's Donald Trump in a nutshell. It's projection. Anytime his lips are moving, he's either lying or projecting. And in this case, the mental illness is not, seriously, if he were the CEO of a major or any corporation, if he had a 2-person painting company and he was in charge of it, there'd be a lot of questions about his ability to function. And the fact that we may be turning over the keys to the greatest nation, strongest nation known to mankind, to a man whose closing message of his campaign is about Arnold Palmer's underpants, that poses a great concern. And if you're suggesting there's mental illness to be ascribed, then I would ascribe it to the person who's made the accusation.
Now, TJ, if I can come back to you for a moment. Prior to withdrawing, Joe Biden was polling as an unpopular president. Do you think Kamala Harris is doing enough to differentiate herself from him, considering that she's still his vice president? How do you balance the two?
Yeah, and it is a very difficult balancing act. I might have taken a different approach because I'm a different person. I might have said to the president, Mr. President, I love you to pieces. You're my hero. But these are 3 things that I'm going to say that differentiate you from me on the campaign trail. And they would actually be along the lines of what Lowman suggested. I'm going to talk to the American people about how we differ on the economy, immigration, and something else. And I know that might cause you concern, but you're going to have to live with that. And I would have gone out and done it. But I'm not the candidate for president. I could never be such a thing. I think it's hard to differentiate yourself. I think she's making attempts, and I think those attempts will probably be increased. The differentiation to draw that distinction for those people still on the fence. I think it's important that she do so, and I think it's important that no other Democrats take offense. We talked, I think. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I did a thing earlier, and we talked about the ad that Bob Casey has where he's appealing to people in the middle. I think it's one of the best political ads I've seen all season, and I've seen a lot of good political ads this season. So Francine, yeah, it's difficult because you want to hold on to the support that the president still absolutely enjoys in large swaths of America and in our party. It's a difficult balancing act. I think she's doing is the best job. Or as good a job as she can, and I think the closing argument should be a little bit stronger. If I had my take, I would draw some certain distinctions more clearly to give anybody the impression who thinks they're all the same, we're all the same. Give them a little something to think on as they go to the polls.
I would agree. Vice President Harris has a very difficult job. It's always a difficult job if you are the incumbent vice president running immediately to succeed the president. That's only been done successfully, 4 times in all of American history where a vice president, a sitting vice president has immediately been elected. The last was George H.W. Bush. And of course, he just pledged 4 more years of Ronald Reagan. And at the time, it was morning in America, so that was a good thing. Well, it's midnight in America now. And in just the last week, Francine, Kamala Harris has 3 times had the opportunity in major interviews to say what she would do differently than Joe Biden. And in each case, her answer was, I can't think of a single thing. So basically what you have is a female version of Joe Biden when it comes to policy and what would be done over the next 4 years. So looking at that, you look back at the last 4 years and say, oh my, do we want 4 more years of an economy that has given us 22% plus inflation? And poll after poll is showing that inflation, even though government statistics show inflation has come down, people are not feeling it. The Commonwealth Foundation did a poll at the end of September, and folks in Pennsylvania think that we are dramatically, nationwide and in Pennsylvania, off on the wrong track. At the Lincoln Institute, we did our semi-annual survey of business CEOs and owners, the people who are actually doing business. And we asked them a series of questions about inflation. And I was a little bit concerned about putting those questions on there because I thought, well, inflation's getting better. I'm rarely surprised by the poll results. But again, inflation not only showed up as the top business concern, it was more pronounced than it was last spring. And businesses think that we're going in the wrong direction now more than they did last spring. So when Kamala Harris says, I can't think of a single thing I'd do different, people are not happy. They're not happy with the direction of the country. And this is why Republicans really need, over the next 2 weeks, let's focus on the 2 issues that people care about. The economy, the fact that from the kitchen table to the boardroom, they are not feeling things getting better.
Let's shift our focus a little bit. Before we run out of time, I do want to talk about some of the statewide races that are happening here, specifically in Pennsylvania. We have a U.S. Senate race, incumbent Democrat Bob Casey against Republican challenger Dave McCormick. What should our viewers know about this race?
Well, that race, I think, is also razor thin. The polls show it at about 3 or 4%. I think it's closer than that. Actually, I think Dave McCormick is Donald Trump's secret weapon in Pennsylvania. If you look at the campaign that Dave McCormick has been running, it is one of the sharpest, most focused campaigns that we've seen from any candidate for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania in recent decades. And he has the money to get the message across. Dave McCormick has been framing the issues. He's been drawing distinctions. And Bob Casey, at this point, I assume he's concluded that Kamala Harris is a loser in Pennsylvania because he's now backing Donald Trump's policies in his ads. And if you look at all of that, I think that Dave McCormick is going to be one of the surprises on election night. I know he's polling behind right now, but this is not unusual. Republicans, because there is a Democrat voter registration edge, considerably smaller than what it has been, Democrats frequently do poll ahead of us until the last week or two, sometimes until the day before. And I think Dave McCormick is going to be in strong position to win. This year, Republicans, I think, have put forth the strongest slate of tickets for our statewide row or constitutional offices. I've been involved in this, well, since 1980. I've never seen as strong a slate as what we have now, with Dave Sunday, Tim DeForest, Stacey Garrity. We have 2 incumbents. We have an open seat for Attorney General. We have a very, very strong statewide ticket at both the U.S. Senate and the constitutional office level. And I think that's going to redound to the benefit of Donald Trump as well.
TJ, your thoughts on the U.S. Senate race?
Well, I mean, I think that, Lowman did the ad that Bob Casey talks about working with people to get stuff done. And I know that is sort of like a dirty notion in some circles these days, the audacity of one working with the other side to advance the interests of Pennsylvania. Oh, how could you? It's heresy. Bob Casey has been working every day as a United States Senator to work to advance the interests of Pennsylvania. And I hate to bring this to cause any surprise, especially on a Monday like this. But sometimes when you get stuff done, it requires you work together with the other side. Bob Casey knows, as a lot of people know, that no one side has all of the right answers all of the time. So if we're content to just dig ourselves in a partisan ditch and yell and scream and point fingers at each other, then maybe McCormick's your guy. But if you want to get stuff done, if you want to put Pennsylvania's interests first, if you want a guy to represent the state, who lives the state, who's always lived in the state, who knows the state inside and out, backwards and forwards, that's Bob Casey. And I would just also leave you, Francine, with this. Bob Casey has a history of outperforming the Democratic nominee for president, no matter who he or she is. And I believe Bob Casey will again outperform Kamala Harris in the state. And in doing so, his victory will be a few points wider than her victory in the state. So I think it sets up well. A lot of incumbents that are considered in deep, severe trouble these days are underwater. Bob Casey's not. He's polling above McCormick. And I think he will take that lead, and it'll be a little bit more. His margin of victory will be a little bit more than Kamala Harris's in this state.
Now, Lowman a moment ago had referenced the Republican ticket for the state row offices, yeah. So I'll give you a moment as well to talk a little bit about the Democrats running for state row offices.
We are also blessed with a great ticket, Erin McClellan, who I really think the world of. She is not afraid to engage in battle. And of course, Malcolm Kenyatta, who's just a great young up-and-coming leader, not just in the legislature, but in politics across America. And my dear pal, Eugene D. Pasquale, who has served this Commonwealth with distinction in a number of different capacities. We are, I can tell you without fear of contradiction, that we are, my friend Lowman, as excited about our statewide ticket as you are about yours, and with good reason. They are, hey, listen, this is, we can say that there are really no tinfoil hatters. This is the first election where the Republicans haven't at least worn one tinfoil hat in their statewide ticket. So it'll be a good campaign, but I like the chances of our folks. They're qualified, they're strong, they're running great campaigns, and they've got a lot of enthusiasm and wind behind them. So I'm looking forward to them reclaiming. In the case of the treasurer and the general, I look forward to reclaiming those seats.
How much of an impact do you think the coattail effect will have on the down ticket races this year?
For State House and Senate? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of down ticket coattails just by virtue of the fact that the presidential race is so close. And the statewide row offices, unfortunately, they don't get the attention they deserve because they're vitally important offices, particularly the Office of Attorney General. And they become a second-tier race, which they should be a top tier. I've often advocated, I've written on many cycles the same column over and over again. We ought to move those 3 statewide row offices to the year after the presidential election, where they would be the marquee race and we could give them the attention that they deserve. But in this case, I think, especially with 2 Republicans running as incumbents in the statewide row offices, you're going to have an even split. There's not going to be a blowout, I don't think, on either side in the presidential or statewide or U.S. Senate races. So I don't really think that gives you much of an edge or a coattail when it comes to the state house and state senate races. And particularly in the state house, a lot of times those races come down to personality, strength of the local parties in their districts, and a lot of local issues.
TJ, who do you think remains as the undecided?
I don't know, but I love that idea, or I'm intrigued by Lowman's idea of moving those to the odd year. That's I'll Google that and read up. And Francine, I'm sorry. Who
are the undecideds this late in the game?
Yeah, probably lots of things. Life is probably a hard, what shoes to wear might be a difficult decision for some of those folks. But some are just legitimately flummoxed. There are a lot of Republicans that have seen the show before and are just kind of worn out, that want to turn the page. They want to have the situation, like I said, there's no real tinfoil hatters. I'm all for our Democrats running statewide in the row offices, but there's no Republican tinfoil hatters this time. And that's what Republicans are longing for. They're longing for the day where they can be competitive again, because the person at the top of the ticket isn't a total anchor. And they want to turn a page from Donald Trump. And this may be the best opportunity to do so. So I think speaking in those ways that Casey has in that ad, talking to independent voters about getting things done. They're not concerned about partisan, doctrine. They're concerned about getting, as our governor would say, getting stuff done. And that's a compelling message. That's who they are. They live everywhere. I don't think they're concentrated to one place. And I love the optimistic closing argument, the promise of a new day and getting things done and turning a page. I think that works for Casey. I think that works for Harris, from the State House to the White House. That message has resonance, and I think it will lead to a good victory.
Lowman, I'll give you the last word.
Well, one of the areas we haven't discussed is foreign policy. And for a presidential race, foreign policy has been amazingly absent from any of the discussions that have taken place, and from either of the candidates really talking about it on the campaign trail. And when you look at what's happening around the world, certainly in the Mideast, which poses a particular problem for Democrats because two of their core constituencies are on diametrically opposed positions on that. Ukraine, the rise of China. None of this is being discussed, and we are perhaps on the verge of World War III. And I would like to see our candidates address that more. And I would suggest to voters, just envision Kamala Harris sitting down as we are face to face, talking with Vladimir Putin or Xi from China, or any of the leaders of Iran or North Korea or the axis of evil that we have today. That scares me because I do not think she is prepared or capable of doing that. Donald Trump has done it before. I think he can do it again. And I really think that in addition to the economy, in addition to immigration, we need to take a look at what America is doing worldwide because we face some very serious challenges.
That concludes this segment. TJ Rooney, Senior Partner at Rooney Novak Isenhour Group, and Lowman Henry, Chair of the Lincoln Institute of Public Opinion Research. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us.
Real pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
PCN's Ellen Front spoke earlier with Representative Rob Matzey about his bill on utility customer protections.
Representative Rob Matzey, welcome to our program. You recently proposed a bill having to do with utility protections. Can you tell us about that bill?
Well, it's a reauthorization bill. It's legislation and statute that we already have that's sunsetting at the conclusion of this term. And it's a piece of legislation we've been working on throughout the course of this term, both with stakeholders inside and outside the building and the Senate. Our bill, House Bill 2189, went through the committee process and through some vetting and passed the House of Representatives. And then that led to us having further conversation with the Senate to come to an agreement on three key issues that were not in the Senate version of the bill. So as it stands right now, both pieces of legislation were amended on the floor of both the House and the Senate, and they are identical. So it remains to be seen which one will get across the finish line, but we do have an agreement with the Senate on the language itself.
How would this change the current utility protections law in Pennsylvania?
Well, currently, as I said, it reauthorizes. And it's really important for workers and everyday folks. It adds dredging to the definition of excavation work. So that's something that's new. It expands the duty to notify 911 and the facility owner in all events of damage resulting in the escape of any flammable, toxic, or corrosive gas or liquid. It inserts a requirement that excavators using trenchless technology, when feasible, it adds a provision limiting the length of an investigation to 270 days. It places a 3-year statute of limitations on the recovery of penalties, and it adds a 7-year sunset so we can examine the effectiveness of the reauthorization. There was some chatter and some talk and some conversation about removing the sunset, but honestly, as technology gets better and then things change throughout the course of time, I thought it was prudent and important for the General Assembly to still have an opportunity to review and then reauthorize.
What inspired you to want to, create a new bill on this?
Well, as I said, the reauthorization, so we were required. We could have just rubber stamped and kept what we had. But we thought that the last time it was vetted in the General Assembly, some things were left out. Some of the things that we were able to include this time, obviously, expansion, the statute of limitations, and including that sunset that was oftentimes talked about removing over the course of the last 8 to 10 years. So those were important components of the piece of legislation. And we feel it makes it a better bill. Everyone knows what one call is, but they may not know what one call is. It's call before you dig. It's 811. You see the commercials, and it really a reminder both to individual folks for their residents as well as on the commercial side.
I know you mentioned this briefly at the beginning, but can you remind our viewers where this bill and the bill in the Senate are in the legislative process right now?
Currently, as it stands, as we are speaking, both bills have been through second reading in both chambers and would be required to get the third reading before going back either to each other's chamber or onto the governor.
Last question. The Pennsylvania Capitol Star reports that your colleague, Representative Craig Williams, said that your bill would absolutely, quote, raise your electric and gas bills. What are your thoughts on that?
That's another bill. It's not this bill. That was Chapter 14 reauthorization, a piece of legislation we're also required to reauthorize. That piece of legislation Representative Williams and I had a little bit of disagreement on exactly what would transpire. We still have not come to an agreement with the Senate on that bill. And as it stands, if we cannot come to an agreement, Chapter 14 will expire on November 30th, and the Public Utility Commission would then be charged with taking care of shutoff notices and terminations throughout the state, something they are very capable of doing and something they've done prior to us authorizing Chapter 14 back in the 1990s. So nothing will really change from the perspective of consumers if that bill does not get reauthorized. But that's what he was referring to.
Representative Rob Matzey, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That concludes today's show. The PCN Capitol Preview returns tomorrow to discuss hunting with the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Game Commission, Stephen Smith. That's tomorrow morning, live at 9 a.m. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.